Chapter 4. Yamato Takeru, the Warrior and the Wound. Part 1. The Making of a Hero. The Age of the Legendary Emperors. We have moved, in our story, from the Age of Gods to the Age of Heroes. This transition is not sharp. Japanese mythology does not draw a clear line between the divine and the human, the way some traditions do. The legendary emperors are not mortal in the ordinary sense. They are descended from Amaterasu, connected to the divine, possessed of powers that exceed ordinary human capacity. But they exist in the world rather than above it. They interact with ordinary people. They can be hurt, deceived, exhausted. They die. The era of the legendary emperors is semi-historical territory. Modern scholars believe that the earliest emperors in the Kojiki are entirely mythological, that the middle emperors are perhaps based on real figures whose stories have been heavily mythologized, and that somewhere around the 4th or 5th century CE, the legendary record begins to overlap with actual history. Where Yamato Takeru falls in this spectrum is uncertain. He may be based on a real prince, a composite of several historical figures, or entirely invented. What is clear is that by the time the Kojiki was compiled, his story had the weight and the complexity of long oral tradition. He was the son of Emperor Keiko, the 12th legendary emperor. His mother's name is not emphasized in the Kojiki, a reflection of the patriarchal values of the court society that produced the text. He was the second son. His birth name was Usu no Mikoto, Prince Mortar. It is not a heroic name. It is the kind of name given before anyone knows who you are going to be. The killing in the bathroom, a character revealed. The story that defines Yamato Takeru comes before any of his famous adventures, before the Kumaso, before the Eastern Campaign, before the sword and the cave and the white bird. It comes in the most ordinary, domestic, almost absurd setting imaginable: a bathroom. Emperor Keiko had been expecting 2 unruly chieftains, brothers from a distant province, to come to the capital and eat at the imperial table. This was a ritual of submission, a political ceremony. You eat at the emperor's table. You acknowledge his authority over you. The brothers refused to come. They didn't come to the first meal or the second. Keiko sent his elder son to admonish them and bring them back. The elder son, apparently assessing the situation and finding it personally dangerous, never went. He hid. Keiko turned to his younger son, the 15-year-old Usu. He gave him the same instructions. Go find the brothers. Admonish them. Encourage them to fulfill their duties. The language is diplomatic, almost gentle. Gently admonish is the phrase. Bring them in. Usu went. 5 days passed. The brothers still didn't appear at the imperial table. A week passed. Keiko began to wonder, not about the brothers, but about his son. Was he all right? Had something happened? He sent for Usu and asked, carefully, "Have you met with the brothers? Are they coming?" Usu looked at his father with an expression that may have been entirely calm. "I have already dealt with them." "Dealt with them, but they haven't come to table. They won't be coming. On the first morning, I waited in the toilet for the elder brother. When he came in, I seized him and crushed him, and pulled his limbs off, and wrapped what was left in a straw mat and threw it away. The younger brother saw what had happened and was very frightened. He begged for mercy. He swore he would submit entirely. He promised anything. But I killed him too." There is a silence in the Kojiki at this point that you can feel across 13 centuries. Emperor Keiko, absolute ruler of Japan, direct descendant of Amaterasu, the 12th legendary emperor, had nothing to say. He had asked for gentle admonishment and received something that had no name yet in his experience. His 15-year-old son had waited in a toilet, disassembled the man, and reported it with the serenity of someone describing an administrative task completed successfully. The emperor was afraid of his own child. He sent Usu away almost immediately on the first, in what would become a series of increasingly dangerous missions. Some later commentators are generous about Keiko's motivations. Some suggest he was simply finding appropriate challenges for an extraordinary warrior, that the missions were gifts of purpose, not sentences of death. The Kojiki itself is less generous. It records that Keiko sent his son on missions without warmth, without preparation, often without adequate support, and that Yamato Takeru went to his aunt at Ise, weeping, because his father's court had never felt like home. The Kumaso brothers, the birth of a name. The Kumaso Takeru brothers were chieftains in Kyushu who had refused to submit to Yamato authority. They were not soft men. They were warriors of genuine power and genuine reputation, the kind of figures who generated legends of their own. Keiko sent his teenage son to deal with them, alone. Usu obtained women's clothing, silk robes, the kind worn by court ladies, from his aunt Yamato Hime, the high priestess of Ise, and transformed himself. He let his hair down. He dressed with care. He walked into the feast that the Kumaso brothers were throwing, and took a seat among the serving women, and waited. The disguise worked because it was good, and because the Kumaso brothers were not expecting it. Why would a warrior from the Yamato court send a teenage girl to infiltrate their feast? The premise was so unlikely that it provided its own cover. But the elder Kumaso Takeru noticed this particular serving woman, noticed the quality of her attention, the stillness beneath the demure gestures, the eyes that were doing something more calculating than serving women's eyes typically did. He was drawn to her, as predators sometimes are to the things that are slightly wrong. Usu sat beside the elder brother at the feast. He ate with him, drank with him, maintained the fiction of the serving girl through the long hours of the celebration. And when the elder brother was drunk enough, when his reactions had slowed and his guard had come down to the level where it could not recover in time, Usu moved. He killed the elder Kumaso Takeru. The younger brother saw what had happened, understood immediately what he was dealing with, and ran. He ran for the entrance to the hall, and he almost made it. Usu caught him at the door and stabbed him through from behind. The younger Kumaso Takeru, dying, looked back at the figure standing over him, and he spoke. His dying words are one of the most interesting moments in Japanese mythology. A great warrior, at the moment of his death, recognizing greatness in his killer and deciding that the right thing to do with his final breath is to honor it. In the West and the East, he said, I have traveled, and I have known every warrior worth knowing. I have never met anyone like you. There is no one in the realm who surpasses you. Your bravery exceeds the bravest name I know, my own. From this day, I give you my name. I name you Yamato Takeru. And he died. The figure standing over him straightened. He had gone to Kyushu as Usu no Mikoto, Prince Mortar, the unremarkable second son of the 12th emperor, the boy his father couldn't keep at court. He came back as Yamato Takeru. Prince Brave of Yamato, the mightiest warrior in the realm, a name given to him not by his father, but by the enemy he had just killed. A name earned in blood from the only judge whose judgment he couldn't dispute. Part 2. The Eastern Campaign sent away again, the visit to Ise. He returned from Kyushu, and his father sent him away again. The eastern provinces had not submitted. The Emishi, the people of northeastern Honshu and beyond, had their own leaders, their own culture, their own sense of what they owed to the Yamato court, which was nothing. They needed to be brought in. And once again, Keiko did not send an army. He sent his son, Yamato Takeru. Before beginning the Eastern Campaign, Yamato Takeru went to Ise, to his aunt Yamato Jaime, who served as the high priestess of the Grand Shrine, the representative of Amaterasu herself on earth. He went, the Kojiki tells us, weeping, not performing grief, not strategically mourning, genuinely, physically weeping. He said to his aunt, "My father must want me dead. When I came back from the Western Campaign, he did not meet with me. He did not ask about my journey. He did not express satisfaction at what I had accomplished. He simply sent me east. He must be hoping I don't come back." Yamato Hime listened. She did not tell him his father loved him, because the text gives no evidence that this was true. She did not minimize his grief or redirect his attention. She listened, and then she gave him two things. First, the Kusanagi sword. The sword Susanoo had found in the tail of Yamata no Orochi. The sword that had been offered to Amaterasu and kept at Ise ever since. A sword that had been in the world before humans had names for the things they feared. She placed it in her nephew's hands. Second, a small bag, sealed tightly, containing a flint and tinder. A fire-starting kit. "When things become desperate," she said, "use these." He took the sword and the bag. He bowed to his aunt. He walked east. Ototachibana, love and sacrifice. Among the companions who joined Yamato Takeru on the Eastern Campaign was a woman named Ototachibana Haim, Princess Ototachibana. She is not described in the Kojiki with great physical detail. The ancient text is generally sparse with physical description, but she is described in terms of her devotion. She chose to accompany Yamato Takeru into unknown territory, into danger, into a campaign with no guaranteed return. That choice itself is her characterization. They traveled together through the eastern provinces. The adventures accumulated, ambushes survived, chieftains subdued, territories brought into the Yamato order. And then they came to the sea. At a crossing, the Hashiramizu no Umi, the fast-running sea, an inlet that had to be crossed by boat. The water was peaceful when they embarked. Then it was not. A storm came up with the suddenness that the sea in Japan can produce, violent and without warning. The waves grew, the boat tossed. The crossing that had seemed straightforward became potentially lethal. Ototachibana looked at the sea. She said calmly, "The sea god is angry. This storm is not natural weather. It is a divine challenge to my lord. I will calm it." Before Yamato Takeru could stop her, before he could understand what she was proposing to do, she spoke to him. A poem, 3 lines, a farewell wrapped in an image. The way Japanese poetry wraps its most unbearable content in beauty, because unbearable content is otherwise unspeakable. She addressed him as "my lord." She told him something about fire, about smoke, about herself. And then she stepped off the boat into the sea. The storm stopped immediately. The waves went flat. The sea became as still as a floor of polished stone, and the boat continued to the other shore, and Yamato Takeru stood at the prow and could not move. For 7 days after the crossing, the Kojiki says, he did not speak of anything else. He walked through the eastern provinces saying, Azuma Waya. Ah, my dear wife, again and again, in the stunned repetition of someone whose mind cannot move past a single fact. Some scholars believe the name Azuma, the ancient Japanese name for the eastern provinces, derives from these words of mourning. The land itself, named after his grief. Scholars note, Oto Tachibana's self-sacrifice is understood in Shinto terms as chinkon, the pacification of an angry divine force through voluntary offering. The sea god's anger required appeasement, and Oto Tachibana chose to be that appeasement. Her action is not read as suicide in any simple sense, but as a sacred act, a deliberate participation in the cosmic order, giving something precious to restore balance. Several shrines in the Kanto region are associated with her memory. The burning grass, Kusanagi urns, its name, Yamato Takeru, continued east, carrying his grief alongside his mission. The victories accumulated. New territories, new submissions, new evidence of a warrior whose reputation now preceded him into lands he had never visited. But with the accumulating victories came something else, the dangerous confidence of a man who has never lost. One of the local chieftains, the Kojiki does not give his name, told Yamato Takeru that there was a great deer on the eastern plain, a supernatural deer, perhaps a god in animal form, a worthy quarry for the greatest warrior in the realm. He invited Yamato Takeru to come and hunt. It was a trap, the most simple kind. Lure the target into open ground and burn it. Yamato Takeru rode out onto the plain. The chieftain's men lit the dry grass at multiple points simultaneously, and the fire spread with the speed and purpose that dry season grass fire always has. Not a controlled burn, but a consuming conflagration, a ring of flame contracting inward from every direction at once. The smoke rose in thick black columns. The heat was already intense from 100 yards away. Yamato Takeru reached into his memory and found his aunt's voice. When things become desperate, he drew Kusanagi, the sacred sword from the tail of the Orochi, the sword that had waited inside a monster for ages. He began to cut, not in a circle. He couldn't cut fast enough to clear a large enough space by going in a circle. He cut in the direction from which the wind was blowing, mowing the grass down in a wide swath, creating a cleared corridor in the direction the fire was approaching from fastest. Then he opened the bag his aunt had given him. Flint, tinder. He lit the cut grass. His fire and the chieftain's fire met each other on the plain, and for a moment there was a wall of flame at the edge of the cleared space, a wall that burned in both directions simultaneously. Then the counter-fire, fed by Yamato Takeru's cleared corridor, raced back along the path he had created, toward the men who had set the original fire. The wind carried it. The dry grass fed it. The chieftain's men ran, but there was nowhere to go. Yamato Takeru walked out of the burned plain unscathed, the Kusanagi sword in his hand, which had cut the grass, the bag from his aunt, which had provided the counter-fire. From that day, the sword was called Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword. The name it carries today, the name under which it reposes at Atsuta Shrine, the name that appears in every account of the imperial regalia. a sword from the mythological age, named in a field, by a warrior who had learned something his father could never have taught him, that survival sometimes requires not fighting the fire, but understanding it. Part 3. The Fall of the Hero. The Pride Before. Mount Ibuki. On his return journey from the Eastern Campaign, rich with victories, Yamato Takeru stopped at the home of a woman named Miyazu Hime, whom he had promised to marry when he returned. He was received warmly. He rested. He made his intentions clear. And he heard from someone, perhaps from Miyazu Hime herself, perhaps from local people, of a troublesome god on nearby Mount Ibuki, a deity who had not submitted, a god of a mountain who remained outside the order that Yamato Takeru had spent years establishing, the greatest warrior in Japan, who had subdued the West and the East, who had faced monsters and ambushes, and the grief of loss, and emerged from all of it intact, looked at Mount Ibuki and made a decision that would prove fatal. He left Kusanagi with Miyazu Hime. He would not need the sacred sword for this. A mere earthly deity, a local mountain god. This was not a challenge worthy of the grass-cutting sword. He would deal with it as a matter of ordinary divine business. This decision, leaving the sword behind, has generated centuries of commentary and interpretation. Was it arrogance? Almost certainly. Was it exhaustion, the kind of bone-deep weariness that makes you cut corners even when you know better? Possibly. Was it grief, a longing for the campaign to be over, a carelessness born of having survived so much that he had stopped fully attending to the possibility of his own death? Perhaps all three. He climbed Mount Ibuki. On the path, he encountered a white boar, large, completely still, standing in the middle of the trail, watching him with eyes that were unnervingly calm. This must be a messenger of the mountain god, Yamato Takeru thought, and kept climbing. I'll deal with it on the way down. He did not stop to honor it. He did not make an offering. He did not treat it with the deference that divine or semi-divine presences require in the Shinto understanding. He walked past it. He kept going up the mountain toward whatever he thought he was going to face. The mountain responded, not with a monster, not with a demon, with hail. Massive, relentless hail falling out of a sky that had been clear an hour ago. The temperature dropped as if the mountain had decided to demonstrate what cold actually meant. The fog came in so thick that the path disappeared. Yamato Takeru's bearings vanished. Forward, back, up, down, all dissolved into gray and cold and the sound of ice on stone. He descended the mountain. The Kojiki does not describe this descent in detail, perhaps because there is nothing heroic about it, perhaps because the warrior who came down was not the warrior who had gone up. He was confused. His mind wandered. He sat down at a spring and drank the water, and the cold water in his mouth was one of the few things that felt real. He was ill in a way he had never been ill. Not wounded. There was no wound. Something more fundamental had broken. Scholars note: the white boar on Mount Ibuki is understood by most scholars as the mountain god itself in disguised form, or as its messenger, which in Shinto terms amounts to the same thing. Yamato Takeru's failure to recognize it and respond appropriately was his fatal transgression. In Shinto thought, divine presences that are not properly acknowledged do not simply go unnoticed. They become dangerous. The mountain god that Yamato Takeru dismissed as a mere earthly deity turned out to be exactly the kind of power that no sword, however sacred, could have cut. The long dying, poems at every stop. What followed is one of the most poignant passages in all of Japanese literature. Yamato Takeru moved south and west, back toward his homeland of Yamato, the region around modern Nara, but he could not move quickly anymore. Something in him was broken, and it was breaking further with each day. He stopped wherever he could, at springs, at hilltops, at any place where a person in pain might find a moment of rest or a moment of beauty, and at each stopping place he composed a poem. He was not trained as a poet. He was a warrior. His skills were physical. His gifts were those of the body and the battle. But in the approach of death, something opened in him that had been closed for a long time. The poems that came out were not warriors' boasts or divine proclamations. They were the words of a man who had never been given permission to simply love where he came from, who had spent his entire short life moving away from home on other people's orders, and who was dying without ever having been allowed to stay. At a spring near Nobo, he stopped to drink and spoke. "Oh, the water at Nobo. This is the water I drink in small sips, having been so long away." An ordinary act, drinking from a spring, made luminous by the consciousness of absence. He has been away too long. The water tastes like what he has missed. He continued, weaker with each mile. At a place called Koto, he stopped to rest against a pine tree, leaning his weight into its trunk, feeling the rough bark against his back. And he addressed the tree. "Oh, pine tree at Koto, if you were a person, I would dress you in a sword and court robes. How I value you, my friend, pine tree." A warrior addressing a tree as a friend, in the absence of any human friend to address. The image is almost unbearable. He has spent his life fighting, and at the end of it, the only companion he has is a tree. He composed a poem about the sword he had left behind, the sword that might have saved him if he had only thought to keep it. He composed a poem about the food of Yamato, about the flavors of home that he would not taste again. And finally, from a hill from which he could just see the distant mountains of Yamato, the beautiful mountains folded together, encircled with blue peaks, he sang his most famous poem, the poem about his homeland, the poem that says Yamato is the finest of all lands, the most beautiful, the most beloved, a poem of such pure homecoming grief that it has been recited, taught, and treasured in Japan for 13 centuries. He could see the mountains. He could not reach them. The distance between him and home was too much for what was left in him. He died at a place called Nobono, in what is now Mie Prefecture. Beside the road he had been walking toward the mountains he could see. He was young. The Kojiki does not give his age, but everything in his story suggests a man who died before 30. The greatest warrior Japan had ever known, victor over serpents and chieftains and burning plains, died by a road in a prefecture he had never meant to stop in, looking toward mountains he had always been leaving. The white bird, an ending that is not an ending. And then, what happened? What the ancient storytellers needed to happen, what every tradition that has ever tried to make sense of a death too young and too unjust has needed to find. Something that goes beyond the ordinary ending. His soul left his body in the form of a great white bird. Not a small bird, not a songbird, but a great bird of pure and brilliant white. A swan, or an eagle, or something that had no name, because it existed only in this moment. It rose from the place where he had fallen, and it flew east, toward the sea. his family, and his retainers, who had been following him for days, trying to support him, trying to be useful in the face of something that could not be helped. They saw the bird rise, and they ran after it. They ran through the sea when it flew over the water, wading in up to their thighs, composing poems of grief as they went. They stumbled through the tall grass fields when it flew low overhead. One by one, as the bird flew further and the terrain became more difficult, they fell behind. The bird did not descend. It flew on, east along the coast, then south, then up, higher and higher, the white shape against the blue sky growing smaller, becoming a point, becoming nothing, gone. And that is, in a mythological sense, exactly right. The story cannot end with a body beside a road. Yamato Takeru's story cannot end with defeat and loss, and the absence of the father's love he never received. It has to go somewhere. The white bird is the answer, not a denial of the death, but a transformation of it. He does not survive, but he does not simply stop. He becomes something the living world can still feel, still reach toward, something that flew on beyond the boundary of what can be followed. Modern Japan. Shiratori Shrine, Whitebird Shrine, exists at several locations in Japan, each one said to be built where the whitebird paused in its flight before finally ascending beyond sight. The shrines in Aichi and Osaka prefectures both claim this connection. Yamato Takeru is worshipped as a divine figure at these shrines, not simply remembered as a legendary hero, but actively venerated as a kami, a divine presence that continues to be felt in the world. He is, in the fullest Shinto sense, not gone. He has simply become invisible. Conclusion: the living mythology of Japan. We began in darkness, a formless void, the universe not yet sorted into the things that constitute a world. We end here in the 21st century, in a Japan that is simultaneously one of the most technologically sophisticated societies on Earth and one of the most continuous. A civilization that has never entirely let go of its oldest stories. Let me tell you what has remained. The grand shrine of Ise, dedicated to Amaterasu, the most sacred site in Shinto, still stands on the bank of the Isuzu River in Mie Prefecture. It receives 8 million pilgrims and visitors each year. It was rebuilt most recently in 2013, and it will be rebuilt again in 2033, as it has been rebuilt every 20 years for over 13 centuries. The ritual is called Shikinen Sengu, and it involves the construction of an entirely new shrine complex. Every beam, every plank of sacred cypress, every object on the adjacent plot of land that has been kept vacant for exactly this purpose. When the new shrine is complete, the divine presence is transferred from old to new in a ceremony conducted in complete darkness. The old shrine is then dismantled, its sacred wood distributed to other shrines across Japan. Then the empty plot waits again for 20 years, when the cycle will begin once more. The Shikinen Sengu is one of the most powerful religious ceremonies in the world, not because of its scale, though its scale is considerable, but because of what it means. It says nothing should last forever. Renewal is not failure, it is faithfulness. The shrine is not maintained by preserving it unchanged. It is maintained by destroying and rebuilding it perfectly, again and again and again. The form persists. The material transforms. This is, when you think about it, exactly what myth does. The story persists. The telling transforms. The 3 imperial treasures are still the sacred symbols of the Japanese throne. at the accession of a new emperor, most recently in 2019, when Emperor Naruhito formally ascended after his father Emperor Akihito's abdication. The mirror, the jewel, and the sword are presented as part of the ceremony that transfers divine legitimacy. The mirror and the jewel were present in the accession ceremony. The sword, kept at Atsuta Shrine, was represented by a replica. These objects have never been publicly displayed, never been photographed. Their physical forms are unknown even to the priests who tend them. They exist at the center of Japanese civilization as objects that are known about, written about, revered, and never seen. The unseen thing, the thing behind the veil, the divine presence that is felt but not observed, this is a Shinto category, and the imperial treasures embody it completely. The high river still flows through Shimane Prefecture with a reddish tint in its water, and there are still people who will tell you, with complete seriousness, or with a smile that doesn't entirely deny the seriousness, that the color comes from the blood of Yamata no Orochi, spilled when Susanoo cut it into pieces at the headwaters of the river in the Age of the Gods. Kagura dance, the sacred dance tradition that traces its origin to Ame no Uzume dancing outside Heaven's Rock Cave, is still performed at Shinto shrines throughout Japan, particularly in the autumn festival season. It has evolved over the centuries into dozens of regional styles, some solemn, some comedic, some theatrical, all of them connected by the underlying mythological story of a goddess dancing to bring light back to the world. If you visit Japan in October or November and you look for it, you will find it. The drums, the masks, the ancient stories told through movement, performed under the open sky of shrine precincts as they have been performed for well over 1,000 years, and in the language itself. Every Japanese person who says yaoyorozu, 8 million things, the phrase for an uncountable multitude, is using the number of gods who gathered at Ame no Yasukawara when Amaterasu hid herself. The word kami itself, which appears in the names of deities, in place names, in surnames, in the word for paper, kami, in the word for hair, kami, in the compound that gives us samurai, is everywhere in the Japanese language, and its presence is a continuous, if often unnoticed, echo of the mythological tradition we have been exploring today. This is what a living mythology looks like. It is not museum culture, not academic study only, not the exclusive province of priests and scholars. It is woven into daily life at a level below conscious attention, in the ceremonies people participate in the language they speak, in the shrines they pass on the way to the station, in the New Year's prayers, and the wedding rituals and the harvest festivals, and the way a gnarled old tree wrapped in a sacred rope commands a moment of quiet from almost anyone who notices it. Japan is not a mythological society in the way that some ancient civilizations were, where the myths were the operating system, where everything was understood through divine narrative. It is a modern, secular in practice society, where the mythology exists as an undercurrent, available to those who look for it, felt even by those who don't. The myths are not lost. They are not even sleeping. They are simply present in the way that anything that has been part of a culture for long enough becomes part of its texture, invisible until you know to look for it, and then everywhere. I hope that after today, you know to look for it. What we have covered today is, I want to be honest with you, a beginning. Japanese mythology is vast. We have told the stories of the creation, of Amaterasu and Susanoo, of Yamato Takeru. We have not told the stories of Okuninushi, the great kami who ruled the earth and built a kingdom of extraordinary diversity and richness before surrendering it to the will of heaven in a negotiation that is one of the most politically sophisticated passages in ancient world literature. We have not told the stories of Urashima Taro, the fisherman who descends to the palace of the sea god and returns to find that centuries have passed in the space of an afternoon. We have not explored the world of the Japanese dragon, the Ryu, or the fox deity Inari, and the armies of fox spirits that serve as divine messengers across the landscape. We have not visited the specific mythology of Okinawa, or the Ainu traditions of Hokkaido, which exist alongside the Yamato mythological tradition with their own richness and their own claims on the land. There is so much more, and I intend to keep telling it. If there is a specific myth, a specific deity, a specific aspect of the Shinto tradition that you would like to see explored in a future video, please let me know in the comments. This community's curiosity is what makes these videos possible, and I read everything. If you want to go deeper on your own, I recommend starting with Donald Philippi's translation of the Kojiki. The Penguin Classics edition is the most accessible. For Japanese mythology in its broader cultural context, Juliet Pigot's Japanese Mythology is an excellent survey. And W. G. Aston's 1896 translation of the Nihon Shoki, though old, remains a valuable resource and is freely available online. Thank you for spending this time with these stories. They have been told for over 1,000 years, and they deserve to be told for 1,000 more. Until next time.